Hi guys, got an older Yamaha R70 receiver here. Thought I would make a quick video because I'm pretty sure what the problem is without taking it apart. What happens is you turn it on, the protection relay clicks in as it should, and you get music. And after maybe 10 minutes or so, that relay will click off and then come back on and click off and back on. It'll do such a thing for about 20 minutes. And sometimes when it goes out totally, you can take a screwdriver, just tap it, and the speakers come back on. But also you notice that the display comes and goes. That is an indication of a bad solder joint on a regulator transistor. That's kind of a common thing with some of the receivers out of the 1980s, 1990s. So let's take a look. Okay, safety first. If you haven't done so yet, unplug the main power supply. I've taken off the lid, and you'll see here that the AC mains come in. They're fused. There's outlets here. These wires are not protected. They're wide open. This will knock you out. So please, please be careful. Know what you're doing. Stay away from that, especially if it's hot. Find the regulators. How do you find the regulators in the receiver? Well, look at the circuit boards. Here is the tuner input, the AM/FM antennas. This is an RF pack. The tunable coils. This is a tuner board. Here's the camera here. I'm going to spin this around. Big heat sink. Big heat sinks are always used for the output transistors. Surprisingly, this model has a dual inline pack amplifier, which provides the output transistors you would normally find in a stereo receiver. Historically, these packs were only used on compact stereo systems back in the 70s and 80s. The ones that have an AM/FM tuner, a turntable on top and such, that would use that type of stereo pack. So it's very unusual to find that in a brand name stereo receiver, but that's what they did. Spinning this around once again, sorry. The main power supply, the big caps here. The full wave rectifier, that is to create the high power DC for the amplifier. So this is more power supply section here. If you look in the power supply section, you'll see some TO220. Those are three-legged transistors with a heat sink. Those are the regulators. They have heat sinks on them that get warm. So over time they have a tendency to desolder themselves. So we'll take the bottom off and we'll take a look at the joints on the regulators next. Okay, the bottom is off. And here's the bottom side of the regulators. You can see where the heat sinks poke through. Looks like I'm not the first one in here. You can tell by the way this heat sink is twisted. And there's obviously been some soldering going on here. So maybe they tried to fix it the same problem once before, maybe not. But if you look closely at this last regulator here, I'll try to magnify it. Using the magnifier lamp on the bench here, if you look at that last regulator, you can see some rings around the leads. Those rings are indicators of a bad solder joint. So I'm betting that's where the problem is. Let's go ahead and resolder that, and while we're at it, let's just redo all four of these regulators and get them connected properly. So these regulator joints have been exposed to a lot of temperature swings over the years, some oxidation. So it's a good idea before we solder them to kind of clean them up a little bit by putting a little bit of flux on top of that joint before you add solder. It will make the new solder blend in much easier. Okay. That looks pretty clean. I'll go ahead and do the other three. So I cleaned up the rest of the joints, all four regulators. And I'd say that looks pretty good. So let's try it out. Okay, power is plugged back in. Let's see what happens. There's the click for the relay. We have music. So we have music. Power supply does not cut out anymore. Good guess, huh? Again, I've seen this so many times in receivers made in the late 70s, during the 80s. If you have a similar situation, it doesn't really matter the brand. Most of these were all made in Japan at the same time. Check the regulators. It might be your problem. Thanks a lot. Bye.